Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Isaac. Before we get started, I just want to point your attention to the Jersey City Free Public Library main website. You can access this website at www.jclibrary.org. And under the calendars of events section, you can find out about more read out loud presentations, and lectures, and author talks like today. Today, we have an author talk with Deesha Philyaw with her recent book, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. Deesha Philyaw's debut story collection, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, was a finalist for the 2020 National Book Award for Fiction and for the Story Prize 2020 and 2021, and longlisted for the 2021 Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies focus on Black women, sex, and the Black church. Deesha is also the co-author of Co-Parenting 101, Helping Your Kids Thrive in Two Households After Divorce. Written in collaboration with her ex-husband, Deesha is a Philyaw Fiction Fellow and a past Pushcart Prize nominee for essay writing in full-grown people. Thank you for being with us and welcome.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Thanks for inviting me.
So I'm just going to get straight into this.
All right.
This is a really, really good book. So can you talk a little bit about the process and how you wrote this book?
Yes. So, I've been saying that I've been writing Church Ladies for 20 years, but didn't realize I was working towards this. I started writing about dissatisfied women. That's how I thought about it. And because I was dissatisfied but I wasn't confident enough to write about myself. And so I started writing novels, attempting to write novels, and sort of mining my nostalgia and my memories, and into my imagination. It was going back to my childhood and my adolescence in Jacksonville, Florida, where I was born and raised. And it was the women in and out of the church that just really captured my imagination, and they just show up and loom so large in my memories. My curiosity about them and how I looked at them the way I guess I've always looked at Black women to see what's possible. Who was I going to be, watching them, and what was this thing called womanhood, and you know, um, and being an pre-adolescent, I was curious about all of these rules and restrictions around sex, and then looking at them like, how did they navigate this stuff? Like, you're not supposed to be doing these things, but human nature says something different. Did they masturbate? Did they like sex? Like, I was a very curious kid. I would never ask these questions because, as they say, I stayed in a child's place. But I would watch, and I was always very curious, and that stuck with me. So when I started writing and sort of looked at that material that I had, and where my interest was, it was there, and I gave my dissatisfaction to these women. And over the years, I've taken some big detours, a co-parenting book and personal essay writing and other nonfiction writing. But I was always trying to get back to fiction, trying to get back to one novel in particular. And I was just stalling. And so the agent that I had for the co-parenting book, she had heard me read some of these stories, and she called them church lady stories. She picked up on this theme, and she suggested that I get intentional about that and actually build a collection of stories that could be a bit of another detour, away from the novel, and that I could always come back. So I'm thankful for her for that suggestion.
So why 9 stories? How did you choose and select 9 and not, let's say, 12 or 5
Yeah.
or 6?
I don't know why, but in my head, I always thought that a collection would have a dozen stories. I have no idea why, just random. But once my book was sold as a partial manuscript to West Virginia University Press, um, there were 6 stories in that manuscript, and 3 of them had been published elsewhere, and 3 had not been published. And so I got the book deal, and they gave me a word count, 35,000 words. So I didn't know how many stories that was going to be. I was just like, I just got to start writing and write till I get to that mark. Early on, I knew that one of those 6 stories, it wasn't a good fit. It never felt finished to me. It didn't excite me. And I just thought, if I'm not feeling it, then nobody else is. And I could take it out. And I also didn't feel, I wasn't interested enough in going in and like fixing it and revising and developing it further. I had lost interest. And so I took it out. So then I had 5 stories. And then I started continuing to build until I got to that word count. And the 4 additional stories, they were all things that I had worked on previously. In one case, it was just a couple of lines. And then like a year before, and I pulled that back and like, what can I do with this? And in another case, um, and so that one I just described, that was How to Make Love to a Physicist. It was just a couple of lines I jotted a long time before, and then I brought that back. And then there was a piece that I was writing, and it was 10 or 15 pages. And I decided it was the last story I wrote. It's not the last story in the collection. It's the last one I wrote, but I was not feeling it. And I thought, well, is there anything here I can salvage? And there were like 2 paragraphs, 2 chunks, and those 2 chunks became instructions for married Christian husbands. So once I got to close to the word count, it's like I'm done, and that was 9 stories.
What unifies these stories?
That theme of Black women, sex, and the Black church. But overarching, I would say it's a collection of stories about women and girls trying to get free, and look at what it costs us to get free and what it costs us when we're not free.
There's power is explored a lot throughout these stories
Mhm.
amongst Black women. Can you talk a little bit about the way in which they exert their power?
Yeah, some of it, the first story, when you say power, the first story I think about is Jael.
Mhm.
Um, and in many ways, it's a revenge story for all of us, as girls, as women who felt powerless when we were being preyed upon, when we were being harassed. And so she exerts some power in that situation that a lot of us don't have, or don't have access, or aren't don't feel like we can access when we're being harmed. So Jael is my favorite character, and she, I think, is one of the most powerful characters. And we know, she expresses that power in a very, big way.
Mhm.
But then there are like other more quiet sorts of, kinds of power expressed in the book. I think about Caroletta in Eula. And so when Eula, doesn't want to get together on Caroletta's birthday, but she was going to make her this gumbo, and she's getting ready, she's preparing for the gumbo. And then when Caroletta is like, yeah, I'll get to, I mean, when Eula's like, oh, I got this date, and I think he's gonna pop the question, Carolina was like, okay. And then she put her okra in there, and she knows Hila doesn't like the okra. So it's like, we just have these little, sometimes it's big and sometimes it's just the little things that we can do for ourselves, or the Lyra in How to Make Love to a Physicist, when she decides, when her mother, chastises her at her big age, she's 42, and her mother is like, how dare you not wear a girdle to church? And
Mhm.
she was like, okay, fine, I'll never, come to church again without wearing a girdle, but guess what? I'm never coming to church again at all.
Mhm.
So it shows up in a lot of different ways. And I hope that, when women read these stories, they see that there's a lot of ways that we can, first of all, see how much power that we have, that has been diminished or taken from us, and that there are lots of ways to reclaim it.
Mhm. I'm going to read a piece from chapter 1 because you mentioned
Okay. Yes.
this is coming from page 8 at the bottom.
All right.
Paragraph. I guess I'll wait a bit too long to respond. Eula whips around her face to me. You aren't. I don't know what's funnier, that Eula thinks my 40-year-old ass hasn't had sex with a man in all of these many years, or that she still considered us both virgins after all we've done together in those same years. Eula, you, with some of your dirty ass men, Eula clamps her hand over her mouth, and in that moment, Sunday school teacher Eula snatches the reins from biology teacher Eula. You aren't clean? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because there's this sort of idea of being, I guess, devout Christian, religious, and then being associated with being clean. But also there's this idea of fornicating, of being unclean too. So
Yeah.
can you explore that a little bit? Because that really is a very
Yeah.
powerful moment in that. Because I
And
can imagine that conversation going on.
yeah, I mean, and you know what? I love that you read that because literally a couple of days ago, I was thinking about this passage in particular. I don't know why. And I was thinking of another layer that even I hadn't considered how quickly Eula says, "You with some dirty ass man," when this woman wants nothing more than a husband. So what is that saying other than she thinks men are dirty. She
Mhm,
really doesn't want any parts of them, but
mhm,
but she wants to be married,
mhm.
and
Right,
so
right.
she told on herself right there. And I didn't even realize, that I did that. But I think that the, that small passage, there's a lot in there about binaries. And that's another thing that this book is about, are these binaries that keep us all tied up and keep us um living so small,
Mhm,
that this, well, first of all, the whole concept of virginity, right? So, there's that. But the idea of cleanliness, and that, if because she's had sex, then somehow she's not clean.
mhm.
um and so, but somehow if she had sex, when Yulo has sex, well, either of them, when they have sex when they're married, they are clean. Like, how does that work? It's a whole question about what people think of marriage as somehow this magic bullet, which we know that it's not. um
And
and
they're having sex with each other. So it's like
right, but of course she doesn't
automatically,
think that.
disconnects from that they're just in the bed, you know,
Right.
but
Eh,
she still thinks that she still is a virgin. And
yeah.
so,
And I think that that's how so many of us survive um, these restrictions, these really small boxes that we are put in, is
mhm,
that we come up with these fictions to make it okay, and to try and get comfortable in those little boxes. We tell ourselves these stories. And that's where Eula and Caroletta bump heads, is that Eula's got this whole story and Caroletta keeps poking at her, at the fictions that, that Eula's peace of mind is based on. She is disturbing her peace with these facts.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Um, let's talk a little bit about food.
Oh, please,
In
yes.
the book. You mentioned food in the beginning, throughout the pretty much
Hmm.
the entire book.
Yeah.
Again, my favorite chapter is Peach Cobbler.
Hmm.
Um, I'm going to read a little piece from that too.
Okay.
And it's coming from the very, very beginning
Yeah.
of Peach Cobbler. My mother's peach cobbler was so good, it made God himself cheat on his wife. When I was 5, I hovered over my mother in the kitchen, watching, close enough to have memorized all the ingredients and steps by the time I was 6, but not too close to make her yell at me for being in the way, and not close enough to see the exact measurements she used. She never wrote the recipe down. Without having to be told, I learned not to ask questions about the cobbler or about God. I learned not to say anything at all about him hunching over our kitchen table every Monday, eating plate after plate of peach cobbler, and then disappearing into the bedroom I shared with my mother. Talk a little bit about that. That's a setup.
And that was, I was doing this exercise that I like to do sometimes in writing workshops, is fabulous first lines, because sometimes we can get so stuck if it's like, okay, I need to write a story, I need to write an essay, I need to write a novel, whatever. But if you can just write one line, if you don't think about what is it going to be, but commit to one great line, and then if you decide to pursue it, the line has set, if it's really good, like it's giving you questions that you need to answer. And I think I was trying to do that for some sort of call for submission that had something to do with food, or I could have just been thinking about food, who knows. But I came up with that first line. And there's so much it gives me a set of kind of marching orders after that, right? So um, it's a child. I know it's this person speaking as a child who thinks that a pastor is God. Like I knew that when I wrote it. Who is this child? Who is her mother? Who is this pastor? And how is that peach cobbler slamming like that? Like, so boom, like I now I have somewhere to go with this. Let's see what happens. So we have three people to start with. And so there's so many relationships to explore, the relationships between the mother and the daughter, the mother and the pastor and the daughter. And then since we can assume that he's married, because that the fourth person, the wife, we don't meet her, but she's in that first line. So then the wife, and now it's complicated, which is good. That's what you want, and so now it's like sorting out those relationships, trying to understand each of these people and the world that they're in, and what do they want, especially the main character, the girl who's speaking. What is it that she wants? And how can I make things really hard for her, because otherwise there'd be no story. And what does that look like? Yeah.
There's also power dynamics between mother and daughter.
Yes.
An exhibit.
Yeah.
This part. Not to give it away, because some of you guys who are watching this, you're gonna have to get you a copy. But can you talk about power dynamic between mother and daughter?
Yeah. So the whole time I was working on building this collection, I had that little elevator speech in my head. This collection is about Black women's sex in the Black church. I turned the manuscript in with the 9 stories, and it was like light bulb. Like, there's a lot of mother-daughter stuff in this book. Surprise, I lost my mother to breast cancer in 2005, and we had a difficult relationship pretty much my whole life. And that is definitely one of the defining relationships of my life. And thankfully, we had time before she died to make our peace. But I think there's still, for me, there was a lot of unfinished business with that relationship. And it comes up in a lot of the stories, all of them probably. And so I like to say there's no character in the stories that's me, and there's no character that's my mother, but there are pieces of us and pieces of our relationship dynamics all up and through this book. And it was not intentional, but if you write what that's what I know. I know complicated mother-daughter stuff, and it just kind of showed up there.
There's a scene in that chapter where Olivia is trying to learn how to make peach cobbler.
Yeah.
Her mom comes in and is like observing her, and it's like, it kind of makes a comment like, if you're smart, you would be nothing like me. I think that's an interesting moment, because in a way she's rejecting her daughter, right? Yeah. And then towards the end, Olivia rejects her mother in that standoff. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that standoff almost didn't happen. It was not in the original draft. And for folks at home, I'm moving around because of this right here.
She's invited.
Yeah, this is fudgy. In the original version of Peach Cobbler, she tutored Trevor, who we won't talk about who Trevor is. She tutored Trevor, and and then it's done. School ends, and he goes off to Morehouse, and then I fast forward to her from being 16 to being in her mid-30s, and she has a bakery. She's successful. And Trevor comes in one day, and he tells her that he knew the secret all along, and so they had this moment of bonding, that like we were 2 kids forced to keep these adults' secrets. And then it ends with her taking him into the kitchen of her bakery, and they make a peach cobbler together and they have sex. And I thought, this is wonderful. This is beautiful. This is the, best thing I've ever written. And years ago, and so the peach cobbler is one of the oldest stories, if not the oldest story in the collection. So this was some years back, and none of my friends who read my stuff, when I'm working on it, nobody liked it. Everybody said it doesn't feel true.
Mm.
And so, I was like in my feelings about it a little bit, but if one person tells you something, you might be able to kind of ignore it, but five very different readers tell you the same thing. And, and so as writers, we have to try not to be too precious about our stuff. And, there's that whole thing about murdering your darling. So that ending was a darling that I murdered. And so I was like, okay, if I don't end it this way, how do I end it? And I realized that one of the things, there were several things I had to go back into the story and deepen and explore more. And one was her relationship with her mother. And
Mhm.
so some of the dynamics that you see in the story where she's interacting with her mother, those were not in the original draft either. But
Mhm.
I felt like I needed to amplify that more so that I could figure out what was going on with them really. And
Mhm.
then I trusted that would lead me to my ending. I didn't know how or what it was going to be, but I was like, let me just revisit and spend a little more time.
Mhm.
When I did that, it also there was like a springboard. I ended up deepening her relationship with Trevor,
Mhm.
because in the original draft, they didn't have the same depth of involvement. It was strictly the tutoring. And so when I went back and kind of deepened her relationships, then I had something more to play with in terms of how the story would end.
I'm going to ask you to read a segment from the book.
Okay.
Any
All
segment.
right. Oh, anyone. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna read my favorite that I love to read. Um, let's see. I'm gonna read from Snowfall. And I think anybody needs to know who hasn't read the book, since I'm reading in the middle of the story, is that the narrator is Arletha, and when she talks about she's talking about herself and her girlfriend Rhonda, and they have moved to a very cold place that is a lot like Pittsburgh, where I am. We were born and raised in warmer places, Georgia and Florida. Warmer too in the residual charm, polite smiles, and gentility of the white people whose ancestors owned ours. In the South, the weather does not force tears from your eyes, causing the faces of passing strangers to register worry about you for a millisecond. It's the wind, you want to tell them, but a millisecond is not enough time. In the South, the weather does not hurt you down to your bones or force you to wake up a half an hour early to remedy what has been done to your steps, your sidewalk, your driveway, and your car as you slept. But the South has hurricanes, they say. Yes, but not damn near daily, not for a full quarter of the year. You tell people up here that you're from the South, and 9 times out of 10, they say the same old thing. I'm sure you miss the sunshine. Rhonda and I both miss taking sunshine and easy morning commutes for granted. But what we really miss are the laughter and embrace of our mothers and grandmothers and aunties, kin and not kin. We miss the big oak tables in their dining rooms where, as kids in the 70s and 80s, we ate bowl after bowl of their banana pudding as they talked to each other about how much weight you'd gained, like you weren't even there. We miss helping them snap green beans and shell peas sitting at their kitchen tables watching The Young and the Restless on the TV perched on the pass through. We miss how they loved Victor Newman, hated Jill Foster, and envied Miss Chancellor and how she dripped diamonds in chandeliers. We miss their bare brown arms reaching to hang clothes on the line with wooden pens. We miss their sun tea, brewed all day in big jars on the picnic table in the backyard, then later loaded with sugar and sipped over plates of their fried chicken in the early evening. We miss lying next to them at night in their four-poster beds with two soft mattresses covered by iron sheets and three-generation-old blankets. We miss their housecoats, perfumed with absorbing junior liniment and hints of the white shoulders they'd spritzed on from an atomizer that morning before church. We miss tracing the soft folds in their skin when we held hands and watched our favorite TV shows in their beds. Dallas, Dynasty, Knots Landing, and Falcon Crest. We miss how they laughed and were easy with each other, how their friendships lasted lifetimes, outlasting wayward husbands and ungrateful children. Outlasted that time Alma caught Joe cheating and she whacked him on the top of the head with the sword he'd brought back from the war, but he told the people at the hospital he didn't know who did it. Outlasted having to hide your medicine bottles in your shoes because otherwise 7 of your 9 children were liable to steal them. We miss how they seemed to judge everyone but themselves. Or maybe that judgment was in the nerve pills they procured from the Chinese doctor on Bay Street who didn't ask questions. We miss their furtive cups of brown liquor on Friday and unabashed cries for Jesus come Sunday. We miss their one gold tooth that made us wonder who they had been as young women. We miss their blue crabs, the shells boiled to a blood red in wash tubs atop bricks over makeshift fires built in the yard. The wash tubs reminded us of cauldrons full of rock salt and cayenne-drenched water, bubbling and rolling, mesh bags of seasonings and halved onions and peppers floating on top, along with potatoes and ears of corn. We miss how they stood over those cauldrons like witches stirring a potion. With sweat beading on the tips of their noses and smoke swirling around their hands and wrists, they wielded long-handled spoons to press the frantic, flailing crabs toward their deaths. We miss how they made our Easter dresses and pound cakes and a way out of no way. But we lost all those things when we chose each other. Only the memories remain, which is why, even though we grew up in different places, so many of our bedtime conversations start with, "Remember when?" As we lie there in the dark with our nostalgia and nothing to distract us from it, not even each other, not anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So that nostalgia I was talking about earlier, those were my memories, those were, I was raised in a house by my mother and my grandmother. And so I was always with older women, listening, watching. And there was just so much ritual around food. We were talking about that. And it was usually around food that I was hearing stories that maybe I shouldn't have been hearing. But as long as I followed the golden rule, which is children should be seen and not heard, I could do what now we call ear hustling, and so I again was just sort of fascinated, and I found so much comfort in my grandmother's company, in her bed, and I'm sure her bed was probably like a queen size bed, but it was the biggest bed in the world, and I, the blankets, like all of the things that provided comfort, um, those are the things that bubble up to the surface. And the crabs, that was my mother's thing. My mother, was that was her Saturday mornings. She would go and get crabs from the fish market. But before she left, she would build the fire in the backyard and put that pot on. So by the time she came back, she could just drop them right in there. So those are some of my fondest memories.
Talking about tradition and ritual, I think in the
Yeah.
story with JL, the
Yes.
men choose the names of their daughters
Yes.
by looking in the Bible.
Yeah.
That was a really interesting sort of tradition. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I read somewhere else about that's something that Black folks did after slavery ended. But I added the part about it being girls and that this family, this kind of witchy thing where they only had girls.
Mhm.
So I thought that was kind of fun to play with.
I want to talk a little bit about the double standards with the
Hmm.
pastor.
Hmm.
Um, there seems to be Pastor Neely
Yes.
lives a double life. He's a married man, but has this full out affair,
Hmm.
ongoing affair. So can you talk about that and how, what messages were you trying to convey with the
Yeah.
pastor having this sort of long lasting affair, but being devout in his religion?
So one of the things I wanted was for Black women to feel seen and heard in these stories and in these characters. I wanted it to all feel familiar. And I wanted to talk about the double standards in the church that often, reflected the way that Black women are second class citizens in the Black church. We are the vast majority in the pews, but not in the leadership, for example. That when there are scandals that involve Black male pastors, somebody was just tweeting about this today, it's just, we just need God's grace and the devil's so busy and all of these things. But when there are women involved, the women are always the problem. The women are always, the handmaidens of the devil, I guess. And so I just feel like the collection would not be complete if there wasn't a character, a story that addressed that dynamic because it's so prevalent.
Mhm.
It was prevalent when I was a kid. It's prevalent now. I'm sure off the top of your head, you could name three pastors right now that are, preaching one thing and living another, but we keep showing them grace,
Mhm.
and we keep, and they're still in the pulpit.
Mhm.
Um, so I think in order for this to be true stories, true in the sense that they're fictional stories that reflect truth, that would have been a glaring omission, had there not been at least one wayward pastor in there.
Mhm. What are some of the biggest takeaways you want readers to
Mhm.
get for reading The Secret Lives of Church Ladies?
That you don't have to settle for those little boxes that we were talking about earlier. That those very human desires that you have for touch, for connection, for love, um, in if the church or the church agents of the church, which is often our mothers, are telling you things that just don't feel right, don't serve you. It's not you. You're not alone. That this is something that a lot of us have had to contend with,
Mhm.
that there are things that we hold dear,
Mhm.
that we think that this is just the way it is, or I can't imagine another way. I want them to take away from the stories that we can unlearn things, that we can be okay when we let go of what we've always known, because it's scary to let go of what we've always known. People wouldn't cling to these things if it didn't give them some comfort, some reassurance, even if it's only, I'm going to cling to this so I don't go to hell,
Right.
right? And so I think having examples of women who made different choices ultimately, and not always, and then they lived happily ever after, but just to give them a taste of what freedom could feel like,
Mhm.
and that to reassure them that it's possible. And also to spark conversations, what I hope will be healing conversations, questioning the things that they've been taught, especially because so many of us were taught not to question. So much of this is is self-referential. If you have faith, you would not question these things, and so then you're stuck, right? So encouraging that questioning, encouraging I've been asked to speak about my book in the context of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I had to really think about that. And so I took it back to this idea of a negative piece when Dr. King was talking about, how white folks want just civility. They don't want justice. They just want civility. You know, everything looks nice on the surface. And I think that it's the same thing for us, is that, you know, we're just supposed to be polite, and it's rude to question and all of that. Also, what John Lewis said about stirring up good trouble. I think it's good trouble for the church that is, again, male dominated in terms of leadership, but the body is women. I think the church should be grappling with these questions. That I hope they engage with these stories and have some difficult conversations about the questions that the stories raise.
I have time for actually one more question, and I think this
Okay.
is going to be a general question, but this is
Okay.
one of the stories that stand out. Instructions for married Christian husbands.
Yeah.
So this is another favorite story of mine, because the character in this one gives a sort of a, a guideline in
Hmm.
terms of dealing with married men. Can
Yeah.
you explore that a little bit? Because it seems
Yeah.
like in this case, she knows exactly what's going on, and she's kind of, you know,
Right.
working with it.
So a couple of things, and I'm trying not to give the spoiler too much, but did you recognize who she is?
No.
Think about the two girls in this book collection. There's Olivia and there's and Jael.
Mhm.
And so in
Oh,
this,
okay. Now, when you said
yeah.
it's very obvious, it's very obvious.
So, and that was not intentional. That I think I couldn't let Olivia go, and I think this is
Right.
where she showed up. So I'll say that first, but also initially, this is the one where I had said I wrote like 10 to 15 pages of a
Mhm.
story. And then I needed one more story to round out the collection. I was getting close to that 35,000 words. And I'm looking at those pages, and it was about a woman who had these serial affairs. And I was like, I'm not feeling this. Like, and what? You know, I had written like about these, you know, her and one man in particular. And I had written how they met, and then the first time he came to her house. And then I was like, I'm bored, right? Like, you know, what is she gonna catch feelings for him? Is he gonna catch feelings for her? Does his wife find out? None of that interested me. So I'm sitting there trying to figure that out. And at the same time, I was, you know, kikiing with a friend of mine about some stuff on social media where like somebody was selling these shirts, I heart her husband, and then the wives were clapping back like, but I have his 401k, or, you know. And so we were laughing, my friend and I, about how there should be like a side chick academy, right? Like you got to learn the rules if you're gonna, you know, do this stuff. And so that got me to thinking about rules, and how the usual rules around affairs are, you know, the mistress is on the margins, and if there's a fallout, it's the women being pitted against each other, and it's almost like the man is incidental to the whole thing, which is a mess. And so I thought, and this is always a good thing when you're stuck, how can you flip the script? Like, how can you disrupt the a norm, right? So if I flip that, instead of her being on the margins as the mistress, what if she was at the center? And what if she made the rules? And
Mhm.
so I took those two paragraphs that I liked from those 10 to 15 pages that I wrote, and they were the first paragraph in that story about how the infantilized husbands of accomplished godly women are low hanging fruit. I like that section. It sort of teased the story up really well. And then there was another section where she's talking about the men getting undressed and the
Mhm.
ritual of taking off the ring, their wedding ring, taking off their clothes. I
Mhm.
like that. And I got intentional, like, what if I started with those two pieces and then had a whole bunch of rules
Mhm.
that were from her perspective, that
Mhm.
served her best interest and not his. And he had to, you know, play or get gone, I guess. So
Exactly.
yeah.
We're coming to an end. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw. You can get this book pretty much anywhere. Amazon, support your local bookstores, but you get it from Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. We have copies here at the Jersey City Free Public, many copies here. So check this book out. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me and for this conversation. I love your questions.